Hey guys, Max92 and welcome back to another tryout. Today's tryout is what I'm calling a weird Steam FPS Roundup. So we'll start this out with some housekeeping. I'm going to be taking a break from tryouts, a mid-season break for the month of September, which means this is the last episode until we come back on the 4th of October following this episode. That's 2023. So if you're watching this in the future, this doesn't matter for you, but just getting that out of the way first. And that's part of why this episode is a lot bigger than usual. Today, we're talking about, I think, 10 FPS games I have on Steam that I picked out. And I was like, these are unusual, or they have very unique styles and little things that make them sort of stand out amongst your typical shooter in the mainstream space. Shooters have been getting weirder in last couple years due to just sort of overuse of the typical stuff, lots of COD and whatnot. And so there's been a lot of indie developers and whatnot taking things and making weirder FPS games. So this is showcasing some of those. And two that, I would talk about if I could talk about them in this episode was Post Void, which if you click the card, I already have a video about Post Void, but that would belong in this video if I hadn't already talked about this. And the second is Cruelty Squad, which is not a game that I own, and I wasn't going to buy it specifically to do this video. I considered buying some games to do this video, but I decided if I really want to, I can just do a second volume 2 of this someday, maybe. So those are two games that would fall under here, but aren't going to be in this video. So let's get into the ones that are. So first up, we're talking about Gunsmith Simulator Prologue, which I'm saying is weird in that it's just another sim game, but this one specifically is around, making and maintenancing guns. This is particularly the prologue. It's a demo. It's a free demo for this. If you've played some of these games, it's, basically that, but this time it's gunsmithing. So you're taking apart weapons and you're putting them back together and you're fixing stuff and cleaning stuff, and even might be doing paints and decals and junk like that to them. And then after the fact, you're taking them to the shooting range, the firing range, and you're testing them to make sure they function the way that they're supposed to. I think that the gunsmithing part is interesting, and the loop of running a shop is, I feel a really good loop for a lot of these games. I personally have played the most of PC Building Simulator, the first one, and it's one of those games where it has that sort of shop loop where you are taking on jobs, and then those jobs, you bring in the computer, you fix the computer, you send it back out. I think it's a really good loop for this type of simulator game. It's the same sort of thing with even Euro Truck, which card video for that one, and other games. There's another couple of car simulator, car mechanic simulators that I did. There's another card for that. We'll see when we talk about those. But where I think this game sort of falls flat is that I don't think the gunplay in the shooting range stuff is engaging whatsoever. I feel half of this is going to be shooting the guns while the other half is playing with them. It's boring if it's I made this cool gun with all these cool whatever, put all these sights and whatever on it, and then you don't get to take it out and you get to shoot it, or if you take it out and shoot it, doesn't feel good to shoot. So it's I don't know. And my last point here is to mention that the actual full Gunsmith Simulator is in early access, and that can be hit or miss. It really depends on the project and, the amount of money the devs have and the amount of, drive they have to actually continue to make this game for however long it takes to finish it. And I think for me personally, I'm not that interested in actually playing Gunsmith Simulator. And so I'd say, well, go check out Gunsmith Simulator Prologue really if you want to see for yourself what it's like. But for me personally, I'd say that this fails the tryout. I'm not really that interested in pursuing it anymore. The next game to talk about is Deadlink Prologue. This is another demo prologue for a different game. This is, like the other one, is free, like a free demo that you can check out to see what Deadlink is. And Deadlink is a cyberpunk roguelike first-person shooter in the style of modern Doom, where you have to sort of like keep killing and doing like specialty types of kills to maintain your health and your ammo. If you've played, at the very least, Doom 2016, because I've not personally played Doom Eternal, you'll know a bit what I'm talking about. I think this plays really well, both as a roguelike and an FPS. Its mechanics come together and give you that sort of one more run feeling that you get with some roguelikes, where it's like, okay, yeah, I just lost this one, but I want to go back in. I think I can do better this time. This next one, this will be the last one. I can do better this time. That sort of like feeling process is like, yeah, that's what I think that this game does. It gets you into that space, and you know, it's not always a given for a roguelike to do that, and this is one I think that does. One thing that I saw for performance-wise, I definitely saw some stuttering here and there on my PC, which I had it at max settings on my PC, so it's probably not as much of a problem if you're playing on lower settings, or, you know, maybe you have a slightly better PC than I do. You might not see that stuff. And my last little piece of criticism is that, like, this demo basically leads up to a boss fight, and that boss has like lasers that shoot out, and they're just not intuitive to avoid or whatever. Like the first stage of its laser is, but the second stage where it starts shooting out 3 of them, and it's like it just doesn't like it didn't click for me how to properly avoid that the whole time I was playing through that, and I beat that boss. So it never really like clicked with me. It's like, how does this work? Because it does a lot of damage if you get caught in the lasers, like very quickly, because it's a laser. And so that was another piece where it's like, that didn't quite feel right, but it was only like that one element of that boss fight. So it wasn't like the whole thing felt off in that way. And so I think this one, I'm gonna say it passed its tryout. Go check out the full game, potentially. I don't know if, like, there's any reason to play the demo if you're going to go play the full game. I don't know if there's, like, save game crossover or anything like that. I've looked up and couldn't really find anything, but check out Deadlink. It seems really cool. So the next game I wanted to talk about was Betrayer, and this is one that, despite it having positive reviews on Steam, it's actually delisted, and it seems like it might be like a publisher, developer, like lost the rights sort of thing, but it is more recently become available on GOG for free, so it's still acquirable if you want it. Betrayer is a very unique feeling game, and you can kind of tell that from the get-go when you open up the game with its visual style, but if I were to give it a stupid description, basically it's what if Skyrim was Dark Souls and a first-person shooter set in colonial America. The visuals are really interesting with the way they decided to, like, by default have it this black and white with red accents. I think it creates a really striking environment, but you also have the option in the settings to turn color on, and then the differences between the color of the real world and the black and white of the other world. The other world is black and white regardless, but it's a slightly different, it's an inverted black and white from the typical black and white of, you know, if you just leave it on default settings. It's just a really striking visual style. Really creates this, like, uneasy vibe that emanates through, like, the game. The game, you feel like you're in danger as you're exploring this environment and, you know, going around and trying to, like, find things and speak with ghosts and all the stuff you do in here. If I were to give any negatives in particular, I'd say that I had a couple hitches playing. Once again, I was playing on max settings, so it could be related to me being on max settings and maybe my hardware not being enough for that. And also, some of the sound effects are like cartoon, like dunk type sound effects, like they feel really out of place in the game. And so, like, it's very minimal negatives. I think it's a really interesting game, and I do want to play more of it to just sort of see where its narrative mystery goes, because it has a really interesting narrative mystery. And also, like, the gameplay is solid, and, you know, like I said, gives me kind of like Skyrim vibes in a sense to, like, some of the ways that its sandbox works. So I'd say that Betrayer also passes its tryout. The next game that I need to talk about here is Grimoire Manastorm. Now, this is an abandoned multiplayer title. It doesn't have any servers, so you can't really play it online, but it's still, while free to play it, you can purchase its DLC, because there's kind of like technically a single player mode. The single player mode is really just like 2 different horde maps where you like just fight waves of enemies for an amount of time. I think you just gotta survive for like 5 minutes or something. And I just don't think the game plays that well. It's not really fun to play, and it might have been fun in a multiplayer context, but I didn't get to play it in a multiplayer context. I don't know if people still exist to play it in a multiplayer context, so I can really only judge it on what was there, and what was there was this single-player horde mode that just wasn't very good, and I played with a little bit of all of the classes, and nothing really spoke to me. Some things didn't really feel like they were working properly. Like, this game is pretty much abandoned, and so I'd say that, like, don't pick this up unless, like, you're gonna, like, run your own servers and play with friends or something, which I'm not gonna do, and I don't know if you can do. I feel like I saw like some tutorials and like the Steam guides, so maybe you can. I'd say don't pick this up, but yeah, so that really for me, I'd say that then means it fails this tryout. Don't get this one probably.
My father died 6 months ago. Since he and my mother divorced, we'd had our problems.
The next game to talk about is Realms of the Haunting. Now, this is a 90s FMV horror shooter point-and-click game. It's running in DOSBox because it's just a DOS ROM. So, like, I don't know if you necessarily need to buy it on Steam. I'm sure there's ways to get it not on Steam. The Steam version opens a DOSBox instance to play. To talk about the actual game, though, I think that the FMV actually didn't look too bad from what I'd seen so far. Like, the actor slotted into the sort of digital backgrounds decently well, and it didn't feel too out of place, which is really interesting. It was like, this isn't bad looking for, you know, an FMV 90s whatever game that I've never really heard of. The only real downside is that, you know, it's a very low resolution, being a game that was from the DOS era still, so it's not like a particularly high quality game, and could probably, if possible, use some kind of re-release with in a modern context. From the hours that I played from it, I found that it plays fine for the most part. I made the mistake of not editing the controls beforehand to give it more normal controls first, because I had some issues with getting it capturing, and I had to end up having to play it on my laptop and running the laptop into the capture card rather than playing it on my desktop, because there's just issues with old games and redoing your aspect ratio and making it so you can't see anything on a second monitor. And so it's easier to just toss it on the laptop and just output the laptop, and that would work. That works pretty great most of the time. But in that process, I forgot to change the controls. And then additionally, it's a point and click, so you have, on top of like dated controls, it's also, you know, got that point and click logic where it's like, I've done literally everything I can think of normal to do. Time to start using every object on everything all over the place and see if something comes of it. It's one of those things that you probably just play with a walkthrough at this point, since there's a lot of them on the internet. My second major negative is that the game is pretty dark, and with that struggling to see and the way that it moves around, I got a little bit motion sick while playing. Not like severely, but it's just sort of like the mixture of that eye strain and like weird movement can often be one of the things that causes me to have motion sickness. And so it's like, it's something I like to bring up, and just in case that's something that other people are prone to. But I'd say that for my verdict here, it would be a pass ? I'm not like full in on it. I do think it's an interesting title, but I'm also like not against it whatsoever, because I think it's an interesting title, and I think it's something that like is a weird, because it's like not quite a first-person shooter, but it's not solely a point and click. It's just those two things sort of merged together, which is a really weird thing to do. So the next game to talk about here is a game called Delta Manifold, which is a voxel-styled Metroid Prime-influenced indie shooter thing. It's a really interesting vibe because it's like not quite like foreboding the way that Metroid tends to be, but it sometimes is. Like it sometimes gets into these like spooky or like unnerving areas, but it's not like all of the places. There's like some places that are just kind of like chill and green and bright. Your goal is kind of vague. You're just sort of like looking for stuff. You're basically just really exploring this space. It's very exploration focused, but it's also very like mystery driven. It's like you don't know what's going on, and so you want to look around and try to find out like what that's the basic like push, is like look for things, find things. And that, in addition to it being like a small indie title, is it's got some of that like small indie jank to it that you see in like really small titles that really isn't like a problem. It's more like a unique charm, but it's also a bit of a directionless game. There's not a lot to be like, go in this direction, check out over here. You have a map that you can open up and look at, but like I've barely really used it because it's not the easiest to sort of navigate, to look around on. It's kind of unintuitive navigation for it. And then additionally, between the very big static HUD, the very fast movement gameplay, and the lighting worked, and the different moving between environments, I was majorly motion sick by the time I was done playing with this. I probably should have stopped well before an hour. I only really played an hour, but I felt so bad that I almost couldn't play another game that night. I like had to like sit for like an hour or two and be like until I was like good enough to play the next game that I was trying to play for this. It's really rough. It's probably will be really rough for you if you have motion sickness, but I do think that it's an interesting like indie Metroid Prime thing, and I'd say that is interesting enough to pass, because I do want to play more of it, and hopefully I don't get majorly motion sick. It might just be like a play in smaller sessions type of thing, because I don't get like motion sick instantly. It's just sort of like over time I just get progressively more motion sick. So yeah, I think I said it already, but it passes. The next game I want to talk about here is Paranautical Activity. This is an older title, but it's very similar to the sort of modern like boomer shooter whatever you want to call it, revival. It's a similar type of shooter to that, but it's voxel styled and it's a roguelike. It's a game that's very fast-paced, very hectic, and really fun. I had a decent amount of time with it, at least in the short amount of time I played with it. I played this one a little less than I played some of the other ones because it's a roguelike, so it's just sort of like, I did a handful of runs, saw like how unlocking things worked, and saw some of the different bosses and stuff, and how stuff progresses, and it was like, okay, I got a good idea of how this game is like, and enough to be like, to stop and not have to play it for a full hour. And sort of burn myself out on it, because I'm not the biggest on roguelikes, or at least like playing roguelikes for extended periods. Some roguelikes can sustain for that long, and then games like this, I think, are more built for like, you play it a little bit here and there and you come back to it periodically. The moment-to-moment gameplay can seemingly change quite a bit, because there's a lot of different items you can pick up that do a lot of different things, and there's, you know, your starter weapons, but then there's also various weapons you can find in the level to swap to that do things that you don't get out of your starter weapons, and so there's just a lot of different things that can really make each individual run feel very unique. And one of the things I think that helps a lot is that the floor boss is not the same every time. And so, you know, you might just get a really difficult boss, or a boss that you have a lot of trouble with on the first floor one time, and then the next run you might get to floor 6 or whatever, and because you got a bunch of bosses you know how to handle, it makes a lot of variability and it keeps the game from getting too stale from longer play sessions. However, it is pretty much just like a standard roguelike where you play it and, you know, that's it. You play it and you do another playthrough, and there's minimal meta progression to it outside of unlocking new items to show up in the world. And maybe some other things that are in there. I didn't read through the whole list like too specifically. I think there's an unlockable class or something, and also the unlockable difficulties. So, like, there are things to unlock here and there, but it's just sort of like, if I unlock this thing, I can use it in the next run. Potentially, it might show up in the next run, and it's not like unlocking things to make the next run easier, like some roguelike type games can be. There's a different term for that. I think it's roguelite for those types, though the terminology is vague and fluctuating and doesn't mean the same thing now as it used to, so I'm not really going to get too deep into it. But I think my verdict on Paranautical Activity, I have written here pass ? Mostly because I'm not the biggest on roguelikes, so I'm not really sure how much I will play through more of it. But, you know, it's a really interesting and fun game. The next game here on my list to talk about is a game called Hedon Bloodrite. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. And this is a game where you play as an orc girl, and it's a shooter made in GZ Doom. It's like a boomer shooter. And what I found was that when enemies are around, it's a really fun game. It's really engaging, and the combat works really well, because, you know, it's Doom's combat in a different game to an extent, to some degree, with, you know, its unique weapons and stuff like that. It just feels like you're playing Doom when there's enough enemies on screen. The issue that this game has, though, is that it does very little player leading, and you end up doing a lot of meandering, sort of like looking for the next thing to do after you've killed all the enemies. And it just leads to a lot of downtime where you're just sort of like not playing the game, really. You're just like, okay, is the thing I'm looking for over here? And the map is not the most helpful thing. Like, it's kind of useful, but the fact that you press tab once, it brings up the see-through map. You press tab a second time, and it brings up the full map. And there's not a way to just pull up the see-through map and then put it away. You have to click through the whole thing. And it took me a lot of time to get through the handful of levels that I played through. Just sort of like having no idea where I'm supposed to be going and what I'm supposed to be doing and how I'm supposed to get there. And I think where I ended up stopping, I had made a whole bunch of progress in a section, and then I died, and I respawned like a long time ago. I was like, okay, I'm done playing right now. That's enough of this. But on additionally is another game where I was experiencing motion sickness from playing. And I don't have like a specific, it's probably just the movement and stuff like that really was the issue. And I think I was experiencing some screen tearing or something. So I think that stuff, like, together was where the motion sickness came from. I want to like this game, is I think where I come down to. And I want to give it like another shot when, you know, I'm not in a call with friends and, you know, I can give it more specific attention. So I'm going to give this one a pass ? Because it just, like I said, I want to like this. I feel like I'm missing something, because it seems like people liked this game, And so maybe I'm just like doing something wrong, or, you know, just slow on the uptake, or maybe I just don't play a lot of these older shooters, and so I don't know what I'm looking for in the environments to continue. You know, hey, bug warning, lots of bugs in this section. Don't watch this part if you don't like bugs. The next game to talk about here is a game called Killbug. Killbug is a game where you shoot bugs, and you're a bug. It's really, really simple. It's, you know, an arcade shooter, basically a score attack, high score thing. I didn't realize this when I bought it. That was just like a high score thing. I probably just didn't read the description well enough. You're swarmed by bugs of various varieties. You got ladybugs, you got spiders, bees, all sorts of whatever those things are that explode. I don't know what kind of bugs explode. Centipedes. Like, if you don't like bugs, don't play this one. I probably should have said that at the top. Let's say a thing that I can put at the top of this section. Hey, bug warning. Lots of bugs in this section. Don't watch this part if you don't like bugs. And we'll put that back at the start of the section. It's a very high intensity game, to where the point where like I was like really on edge playing in this, when I got far enough in where you're just being swarmed and there's just like bugs everywhere. You're just really focused on like not dying. And I think it does a really cool risk-reward thing where your melee attack, I think it both heals you and refills your gun, so it's really a necessity to incorporate these melee attacks, but the melee attacks also bring you closer and therefore put you in a lot of danger to take a lot of damage. So like you might not even be like coming away with much more health than you left with if you do it wrong. And it's just a really cool game. I just really like playing it. I didn't play it for the full hour, I don't believe, because it's another like game where I'm just sort of like, it's the same arena. You've got basically the same moves. There's some things that I did sometimes. I didn't ever really figure out how they work, but it's, you know, the same moves. There aren't like upgrades. It's not like a roguelike or anything. It's really just sort of like an arcade shooter. But like there's no meta progression. It's just sort of like do better. You gain skill from literally playing, the skill of playing the game, and you hopefully make it farther next time. And I don't know if there's an ending. There could be. I don't know. I didn't really look at it. It might just be like an endless what your high score is. The highest scores on the leaderboard, the online leaderboard, are like 14 million or something. And my highest scores were in like the 200,000 range. So like, I don't know. It probably just goes on forever. I don't know. But it's a cool game, and I'd say it passes this tryout. This last game, I don't know what, if it's just called Gore, GOR3, Gore 3. I don't know which one it is. It could just be like Gore with like the 3 being the E potentially. Either way, this is a game. It sure is. It's a roguelike shooter in that, you know, you have one life to complete these 3 levels, and if you die, you start over back at the beginning. There's not really any of the other like actual like come to be roguelike elements. No meta progression, no anything like that. It's really just like beat these 3 missions concurrently without dying. It's really doing something. You look at it, it's doing something over there, but I have no idea what that is. It's a weird game that's like really intentionally weird and surreal, and like I don't really know what it's trying to do exactly. It's just sort of like a weird shooter, another one. I finished this game, actually. I only played for I didn't even play for 15 minutes. Took me a handful of attempts, but I got through the 3 levels. It seems like, looking at some of the screenshots on the Steam discussion pages and the screenshot section, the community page for the game, there are like secrets or like things to find and interact with that are unique, but like I don't know what I played really. It was just sort of like okay, that's enough of that, I guess. It's free, so I guess I'll give it a pass ? I don't know if it's worth playing, but it's a weird enough experience that it's like, maybe look at it, especially being free. It's a weird game. This developer has another game that looks a little less weird. It's still weird looking, but a little less weird. Also appears to be a shooter, so that could be something to check out. I don't know. I'm a PNG now. I'm not gonna bother to even move it because I have been editing a lot over the last however long. Not all the time. This wasn't supposed to come out on like August 30th, and as I'm recording this, it is, as the date showed before, September 18th. So I'm a little past my initial attempt. The biggest issue was that this video was way too big. I don't know why I thought I could do 10 games in a single tryout. That was not great foresight on my part. But the other part is that I've been increasingly burnt out on video editing. I don't really like watching and listening to myself that much. And so I've been increasingly less interested in sitting down to edit these videos after I recorded them. Don't want this to take too long, but just get into some of the stuff here. I've been busy doing stuff. I'm working a job. I do stuff after work sometimes here and there with some coworkers. I got sick one of these past weeks. So there's just been a lot going on, and it's made it so that like I haven't wanted to or been able to sit down and just bang this out because I'm tired of editing my own videos, and I'm just going to have to keep editing them because I don't have a recourse because I can't afford to hire an editor. But that's fine. This is like, I think I'm going to make another video about burnout and stuff, maybe at some point, and talk a bit more in detail about that in a not just rambly form. But I'm getting close to running out of sad song for this bit, so I might as well just kick it back to past me with the conclusions on this stupidly large tryout. This was a mistake. I shouldn't have made it this big, but hopefully I'm close to done as I'm recording this. To talk about conclusions here on this too long video, I got motion sick a lot more than I expected here. I just like forget that like I get motion sickness, and then like it happens and it's like, oh yeah, that does happen. And it's got like, you know, really consistent things that cause it for the most part. So it's like, okay, cool. I guess that's a thing that I would have to deal with. There are, you know, I could just like, there's motion sickness medication I could take to mitigate these things, but like, it's not like every game. So it's sort of like you gotta feel it out and figure out which games are gonna cause it. It seems like games that run less like consistent frame rates and stuff like that often are the case. I don't know, it's just sort of like I get motion sick sometimes, and it seems to be popping up more than I expected, which is really interesting. Another thing that to want to say here is that like some of these games weren't really that weird after like playing them. I'd say most of them were, but I'd say in particular that like Deadlink Prologue is pretty normal of a video game. And honestly, Gunsmith Simulator Prologue isn't that weird either. The rest of them, they're on the weirder side. I'd say, for the most part, they're on the weirder side of shooters. And my final thing to say here is that there's just, over the last probably 10 years, there's become like a very like wide breadth of types of shooters. And it's not just sort of like, you got your Call of Duty, you got your Halo, you got your Medal of Honor. You know, we've really like stepped out, and I mean, you had some of like the older shooters, your Doom, your Quake, your Unreal Tournament, those sort of things that like were more unique and weren't just like the military FPS that got really popular in like the late 2000s into the 2010s. But now you've got a lot of like very unique experiences, a lot of them drawing off of those older shooters, like the Boomer Shooter Revival that I mentioned, A lot of those games have a tendency to be less usual. But, like, there's also, like, all these things that I described in this video, all these games I talked about that are doing things their own way, or they're sort of, like, taking more unique spins, say, like the Manifold, taking a more unique spin in a shooter, which I'd say I've not personally played Metroid Prime, but from what I've seen of it, it doesn't seem to be the most standard shooter as a Metroid game, and taking those ideas and making something new. And, you know, even like Realms of the Haunting, which is just like an old game. That one's weird as hell. A shooter that's also an FPS. That's weird. And that's cool. And I think, like, variance in a genre is a good thing. You know, it gives a lot of opportunity for different people to have different experiences, and not everyone has to play the same game all the time. Not everyone has to play the same game together, and just different experiences, I think, create a better life for a lot of people. You know, you have a better perspective on the world, and that's all. I don't know, I'm not really going anywhere with this. That's really, like, I've talked too long already. This video is going to be too long. So let's just get into the end bits now. If you go down to the description, find a beacons.ai link that'll take you to all my places like Patreon, Bandcamp, Redbubble, etc. Subscribe and keep with us in other shows. Not this show for the next month. I will hopefully have some other shows to put out over the next month while I am on break. So subscribe so you can see those when they come out. Like the video if you liked it, just like I did it. I already said subscribe. Share, leave a comment. Have you played any of these shooters? What's your favorite weird shooter? Tell me in the comments, share the videos, do the things. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!